Good morning, folks. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, back down here at the Pathfinder Outdoor Classroom. We just finished an advanced survival course, 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I took the rest of the day off yesterday, spent some time with the family, things like that. And this morning, what I wanted to do with you was I wanted to shoot a video on the project list and gear list from that advanced class. One of the things that happens at the advanced class is the gear list, the project list, and class flow changes with every single class so that every student gets an individual experience and has no idea what's going to happen before they get there. We give them a gear list that they're to bring with them that comes from the intermediate and the basic class gear list, so they don't have to buy anything new. They're just bringing kit with them that they already have. So anything we take away from them subsequently isn't a matter of, I just went and bought this for this class, or at least it shouldn't be. Because many times we take certain pieces of gear away, or we take the kit list away in its entirety. And that's exactly what we did in this advanced class. We told them to leave everything they brought with them in the vehicle, meet us in the parking lot, and we issued every person in the advanced class an individual kit that was exactly the same, but it was a very small amount of items. We're going to talk about that first right now. Okay, so when I build out these kits that we issue at the advanced class, I have to think about how much is going to be harvested off the landscape, how much is going to come from kit, what projects they're going to create, and make sure that they have the tools or availability to the material they need to accomplish that task. So let's talk through real quick. Let me get rid of the cat here. This is basically the kit that they were issued in the parking lot, all right? They were given one 70-30 military style twin wool blanket. They were given 2 sections of 3/8 rope, and this is natural fiber rope that was 3/8 by 50 foot, and they cut in half immediately. We'll talk about that momentarily. They were issued 1 roll of jute twine, similar to a roll of bank line, but a roll of jute twine. 2 smooth river stones, 1 copper nail and 1 steel nail, 1 pocket knife that had a cutting blade and a saw blade on the tool. All right, there's a gut hook on this one as well. That was inconsequential pretty much for the weekend. It was just a spare cutting blade for cutting cordage, things like that. If I could have found ones in stock that just had 2 blades, I would have bought them, but they didn't have enough of them in stock at the time for my advanced class. So basically they got 1 pocket knife. And if you've watched my videos for very long, you know that I generally carry some type of pocket knife, whether it's an SAK or just some type of folding knife, a case or something like that. And you can do a lot with a pocket knife. Belt knives a lot of times are overrated for what you need them for in a bushcraft scenario. So we gave them a folding knife for the weekend. And this is a cheap $30, under $30 folding knife off Amazon. And this accomplished every cutting chore or cutting tool task they had for the weekend. They got a small shard of canvas that was their basically repair canvas. It could also be used for other things that we'll talk about in a minute. They got a larger piece of canvas. This is 4-ounce canvas right off the bolt. So it's 9 feet long by 4 feet wide. 5 feet wide, excuse me, 9 by 4. And it doesn't take up a lot of room in a kit. It's a fairly small package, okay? But it's got a lot of versatility, especially when you have a team of 2 and you have 2 of these, which we'll talk about that during the project list. And they got a shemagh, and this has only got a little bit left of it. It's just a shard, but they got a brand new orange shemagh as well. This was the entirety of the kit that they used for the weekend. Other than what they created off the landscape, this was it. So you can see, number 1, they had no container. That tells you they had to find containers off the landscape. That generally came in the form of beer bottles, all right? As far as the 5 C's go, they had a cutting tool. Their combustion device, in the first sense of the word, was a bow drill fire. And they had to make a bow drill fire using one of their bootlaces to begin with. And after that, they were required to make a second bow drill fire. They had to give up their bootlace. They had to make enough natural cordage off the landscape for a second bootlace and a bow drill fire. Most of the cordage made this weekend off the landscape, as we're talking about this, was either milkweed or dogbane, just so you know what cordage material we were using to make the cordage with. And dogbane will definitely make a strong enough cordage, as will milkweed, if it's done correctly, to make a bow drill fire off the landscape. There are some tricks and tips I could give you to do that, but again, that's what the advanced class is for, really. You can't treat it like it's paracord or bank line, expect it to work the same way, because it does not. However, that was their first task, basically, was to first cut this rope in half. They had to seize one end of the rope, and the other end they had to, and by seizing I mean they had to use natural cordage to wrap the end of that rope with a whipping. And then the middle part of that rope, where they cut it in half, they had to eye splice both sides of that rope with about a 2-inch eye in that rope to use later on for shelters and hammocks and things like that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And if you look at my methodology of the 5 C's, that first cutting tool should be capable of either making or assisting in the making of the other 4 if needs be. Now, your container is the exception to that rule in this case, where you could have made a bark container or something of that nature. You could have made a burned out container or something of that nature, but we had them use bottles off the landscape because we know where there's a dump, a bottle dump basically, out in the wildlife area, and we harvested material from that, basically carrying trash from the woods back out to a location on my property, and then we got rid of all the glass after the fact. So we're kind of cleaning up the woods partially, as well as using things off the landscape for their survival. So that takes care of that in the kit. Now what I'd like to talk to you about is how they went through this kit and the projects they had to create with it. And we'll talk about what they used these things for first, and then we'll talk about individual projects, and I'll show you examples of projects from the weekend. All right, so we talked about what they began with. Now let's talk about the kit in its entirety when they were done, what they had when they were finished, okay? And I've got a pack basket over here. I'll show you guys in a second, and a bow, and all the projects that they completed throughout the weekend, and we'll kind of walk through them day by day so you can kind of look at what they created off the landscape, how they used the tools that we gave them, and some examples of the things that they made or that my instructors made as examples for them over the weekend, because I don't have all of their stuff here. Most of them took that stuff with them. I do have some instructor examples here. I have a couple things that were left here by a guy who flew, so I've got his pack and things like that. We can talk about that, and then we'll just kind of take a look at it in its entirety. And I think you guys will get a better picture of what all you can do with very little off the landscape if you have the skills and you have the resources available. All right, so first things first, here is a pack frame with the blanket stuffed inside. And you can see this is a grapevine skeleton style pack frame tied with jute cord. And it's got the blanket inside of it for a liner, and then it's all folded up inside. So this is where you would store your kit. And then you've got your single rope, one of your pieces, when you cut your initial rope in half, gives you your straps. And then at the bottom, you've got an area here where you can go around the bottom rung here. That becomes your shoulder strap, and a second shoulder strap here. And then you would tie it off here around your waist. And that would give you your backpack for the weekend, made from a single shard of canvas material and a skeletal frame made from grapevine. With that, you would have your blanket. And we probably should talk about, while we're on the blanket, let's talk about a couple things that go with the blanket they made over the weekend. Okay, so while we're on the subject of the blanket, let's talk about a couple projects they made to go with this blanket. We talked about the fact that they had used this thing for multiple functions. And one of the functions they used this for was outerwear on a cold morning. It got down to 59, 60 a couple days, but it was 90 during the day. So it was fairly cold in the morning. And for that reason, we taught them to make a blanket pin that you could basically gather the material by putting this blanket around your body and then shove a pin through to hold that together, just like this. And that would hold that around your body as a blanket pin so that you had something wrapped around you and still had your hands free to work if you needed to. And this blanket pin was made from a hardwood pin. This is walnut, and wraps of natural material off the landscape, and this is ground cedar, okay? So that was one of their projects, was that ground cedar blanket pin, okay? The other thing they did with this blanket was they made a browse bed with this blanket. And so to do that, you folded it in half, and then you had to kind of stitch it together on 3 sides to stuff it and then stitch the four side together to give you that 4-inch natural mattress. And to do that, they made these hardwood pins. And you can see that there are 6 of these hardwood pins. And what you would do with these pins is, and what you'd want to do with this is you'd want to come in from the bottom side with that pin and shove it in, and then go back in and push it through. So this is the bottom of the blanket you're looking at now. And when you did that, what that would do for you is it would keep that point underneath so that you weren't running into that point during the night. You had that underneath you. And that would close the blanket off to be able to make a browse bed or a mattress out of this blanket. And then if you were cowboy camping, you could just cover up with the shard. Or if you were in a lean-to of some sort, you could just sleep on top of this. And you could choose to use one of the shards as a blanket or use both of the shards for your lean, depending on the project that you had created for that day that we dictated for your shelter. We cowboy camped one night, we hammock camped one night, and we built a lean-to, a framed lean with a vent system in it the third night, all right? So that takes care of project that had to do basically with the blanket itself. You had your other rope that you could use from your pack basket. You had one of these on the pack basket of your straps. The other one was your hammock strap paired with the one that's on your backpack. And this could also be used with a loop-to-loop connection for a ridge line if you're trying to make a suspended tarp shelter. Now realize, we gave them a shard of material. So they had to tie things into the corners, like rocks and things like that, to be able to create corner loops. That's nothing new. That's in my first book. It's in Bushcraft 101. It's been in Boy Scout manuals throughout time. It's nothing new, but it's something that doesn't get taught a lot, and it's a worthwhile lesson. So we used that this weekend as well. Now, let's talk about some of the other peripherals here, okay? We talked about they had to create a solar navigation device. So they made an equatorial sundial, which means the point points toward north, not toward the sun. And it gives you the differential of angles here for the hours of the day. And if you realize that solar time, or basically time, is nothing but solar movement and rotation of the earth, and you understand that that is angles, and angles of geometry, and geometry is navigation, you can both navigate and tell time with this single device fairly closely, okay? Fairly closely. So they made an equatorial sundial on day one. All right, so fire deliverables. The first fire you made with a bow drill fire, and we have a bow drill set right here. And you had to make that fire with your bootlace to show you that if you're not carrying cordage, where's the sacrifice going to be made? If you need the fire right now, you're probably going to sacrifice the cordage you have, which is a bootlace most of the time. And it's probably going to blow up on you during the process, in which case you're going to have to make a natural cordage bootlace to replace it. And then in this class, you have to make a natural cordage bow drill fire. For that, we used dogbane. And here's a piece of dogbane cordage, very, very strong. This is actually the one that made the bow drill fire. And once you've accomplished that, then you can go to a jute twine woven cordage, reverse wrap 2-ply cordage, excuse me, to make your next fire, which is your third bow drill fire. Your fourth bow drill fire was a tandem bow drill fire, a 2-man bow drill fire, which involves this being wrapped around the spindle with toggles attached. One guy turning the spindle and one guy applying the pressure on the bearing block and spindle to the hearth board. So there's 4 friction fires you had to make in this class before you graduated to something that was flint and steel based. For the flint and steel based fire, what they did was they had to char material in a glass container, and they could use a piece of their canvas from their shard, or they could use a piece of their shamag that was provided to them. And they had to char material over the fire in a glass container. The smaller this glass container is, the better off you are. The faster the interior is going to heat up. And if you're using something that's charable quickly, like natural materials that's on your person, like a shamag or a piece of canvas, it's much faster than charring natural material off the landscape like punk woods. So if you can do this, slide this into the fire, heat it up slowly, watch what's going on because you got a clear jar, right? You need a small jar for this. Again, that's part of the treasure hunt off the landscape when you're finding your bottles for boiling water, is to find something small like this, like a baby food jar in a bottle dump. That's gold when it comes to making charred material in, okay? So that was one of the projects. And once you got that, after your 4 bow drill fires, you basically went to a location and you found this, which is a broken Bic lighter that's full of mud. You had to clean that out and make it spark again, which we all know, we've all found lighters in the dirt, in the mud, in a ditch, in a parking lot. Somebody's thrown out, it was out of fluid or broken, but it still will throw sparks. And you could use those sparks then to ignite your charred material to make your next fire. And you're always carrying materials for fire making in your kit and replenishing those materials with every navigation to make sure you have it, and that's part of your kit, okay? As far as, let me put this bow over here too so we have that in our kit. Now, as far as the shelter components, again, hammock the first night, cowboy camp the second night on the ground. Third night, we built a lean-to structure that was basically a framed lean that had two tarps, one of them overlapped and came out from the other one so that you had a draw, an air draw, which would, number one, draw smoke from a fire. Number two, it would also force airflow into your shelter. It would travel up and out, which kept airflow through the shelter. Their Woodsman's Apothecary. Their Woodsman's Apothecary was built off the landscape during their plant walk and after during their resource walks. You can see he's got his map wrapped around this, and he's got his materials here and an extra nail. He probably used his copper nail and never used his steel nail. And then he has the map that he had to make with his equatorial sundial for the weekend, and he's got that wrapped in a material shroud here of canvas. This came out of a student's backpack, okay, that was left here. Now, their Woodsman's Apothecary had to address the 5 B's of self-aid as taught in the Pathfinder system: bleeding, breaks and strains, bites and stings, burns and blisters. So they had to have 2 trees and 2 plants, which they were taught on their resource walk with an instructor, which trees work best for that and how to utilize them. And they had to build a Woodsman's Apothecary that was a deliverable due at the end of the class, okay? So they had that in their kit. As far as their knife, they had the one they started with. They had a pocket knife that had a saw blade on one side, a regular blade on the other side, a little clip point blade on the other side, clip point blade, drop point blade on one side, old timer, 30 bucks, Amazon. That was their tool, along with their nails for the weekend. They had to create with their nails knapping tools, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because the first weapon they made was a rabbit stick. So with their baton, making sure that their baton was not unwieldy was a key element to this whole thing, okay? And this, you can see, this is probably where he got his wedges from, but making something that you could throw, and they did practice this, to take game, but was also heavy enough that you could baton wedges and things like that, pound stakes. That was an important aspect of this. And they had to carry that and have it at the end of the day as well. At the end of the class with their kit, this had to be there, okay? Here's their cordage for their bow drill. And their bow drill set, along with their bow. All of these components were in the kit. On night 1, they had to make a Balearic sling, and they had to weave this sling out of jute twine. Again, eating up that jute twine, forcing them into more and more natural cordage, which in the end they could trade 2 to 1. 1 foot of good natural cordage, the same diameter as the jute, for 2 foot of jute natural cordage. That was the trade-off all weekend. So he forced them into projects like making the pack frame, making this Balearic sling, and then eventually making this bundle bow to eat up that natural cordage. Once they made this Balearic sling, they were responsible to make ammunition. These are clay bullets off the landscape that have been dried, good and hard, ready to go. This is a black walnut off the landscape. This gives you good round ammunition if you can make it. You could also use rocks, obviously, but this is more accurate, and they were responsible to collect or make this stuff as well as being able to use rocks if they chose to. Along with their equatorial sundial, speaking of rocks, they had to have a pace counting device, and most of them chose just a pile of rocks in their pocket. For that, they could transfer from one to the other. Now, once they got beyond this, they first went from rabbit stick to sling. They then went to a bundle bow for their next weapon, and again, jute twine bowstring that had to be manufactured, reverse strap 2-ply cordage. It had to have a timber hitch in one end, and it had to have just a knot or 2 in the other end to grab and pull it into, give you your brace height, okay? And this is 3 pieces of maple that are 3/4 inch in diameter. The back piece is a little bit shorter than the 2 front pieces. So it's in a pyramid, and this is the front of the bow and this is the back, just like this, so you can wrap around it. It's not a predator bow, It's a 40-pound, decent bundle bow that, as long as you left it unstrung and it didn't take a set when you weren't hunting with it, would give you a decent temporary bow that you could then make arrows for. All right, so the next step was for them to create tools, knapping tools. And you can see here's a copper, what's called an ishi stick, or a longer pressure flaker, a short pressure flaker. They all had leather gloves that they were allowed to bring. And then they had the 2 stones that they were issued for percussion and for abrasion, okay? They also had to make pitch sticks to be able to adhere those to their shaft, and they had to collect arrow shafts and fletching. Here are 2 arrowheads that you can see are made from glass. They're nice and flat, and they are not too thick but not too thin, and they have a sharp edge on them. That's close enough for something you're going to learn in a day. This is not a week-long knapping class. And here's a preform, and they had to have a couple of preforms so that they had things in process. They had raw glass, they had preforms, and they had points. And then they also had to have one mounted on an arrow, on an arrowwood arrow with some type of fletching. And this is just a flue fletching made out of a turkey feather from the landscape with a self-knock cut in the arrow and a good straight arrowwood shaft for their bow. That gave them their bow and arrow kit that they could use for the rest of the weekend. So this kit that you have in front of you is what they had in their pack basket. And remember what they started with as far as the kit goes and what they ended up having in the end. And all of these things were created off the landscape by hand, and the only tool they had was this single pocket knife to create all of these things. And then they had a piece of tarp that they could use that was just a raw shard right off the bolt of canvas that was 4 feet by 9 feet, or 5 feet by 9 feet. A 70 by 30 raw blanket, wool blanket, a couple nails, like I said, a pocket knife, a couple rocks. I mean, they had very little for kit. They had to turn in their phones, keys, and watches at the beginning of the course. And all of their kit was taken away from them. They were allowed to have a notebook, a pencil, a pair of gloves. Leather gloves. That was basically all they were allowed to bring with them, and one piece of outerwear that was non-waterproof. That was it for the weekend. They all did a fantastic job. We actually ended up patching 6 people from the class and bringing 3 more instructor candidates, one step closer to a black hat. So I wanted to go over that with you guys today and kind of show you what kit they started with, what kit they ended up with, the things that they had created off the landscape and how they made them. If there's any particular videos you'd like on any of this kind of stuff, I'm more than happy to make them. Although most of them I've had videos up on before. They may be gone now, but they were up there at one time. And a lot of this stuff is also covered in my books, to include Bushcraft 101 and Survivability for the Common Man, which is my very first book. And a lot of this stuff was covered in that book as well. All right, guys, listen, I appreciate you joining me on this final equipment list from the advanced class, so you can kind of see the projects they were able to complete and make. And it kind of gives you an inside look to the advanced class as well, and what you're able to accomplish over a 4-day period between the teaching and the seminars of the class themselves, going out, collecting materials off the landscape yourself, coming back and creating these projects. It's a very, very worthwhile class that teaches a lot of lessons, inside lessons. And really, I think that that's where primitive skills shine. It's not something I'm going to use every day. It's not something I'm going to bank on for survival. But the process, the material selection, the material manipulation of those things really, I think, is important. And when you look at natural cordage, I think that's one of the biggest primitive style skills that everyone should know. It's one of the fairly easiest skills to learn, depending on what materials you have in your particular area of your landscape, but you'll have something that's usable for natural cordage, I'm sure. But that can benefit you probably greater than anything as far as supplementing your kit and not utilizing things out of your kit when you don't absolutely have to, is natural cordage. From there, I would definitely learn friction fire and friction fire with natural cordage, and then just expand your knowledge into shelters, weapons, all those types of things that you can make off the landscape to supplement your kit. I appreciate your views and I appreciate your support. If you ever want to come to a class at the Pathfinder School, all you need to do is go to selfrelianceoutfitters.com, pull up the training tab, and it has a whole list of our classes, what the requirements are, what the kit lists are, and all those types of things. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly at pathfindersurvival@gmail.com. I appreciate your support. I appreciate everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can, guys.